In the history of BYD, some years were about growth, some were about survival, and some were about innovation. But 2020 was different. It was the year the world stopped. Factories closed. Economies struggled. The automotive industry entered one of its most difficult periods in decades. But inside BYD, something extraordinary was happening. A new battery was about to be unveiled. A new flagship electric car was about to enter the market. And when the COVID-19 pandemic created an unprecedented shortage of medical supplies, BYD would suddenly transform itself once again. From batteries, to cars, to medical equipment. This is the story of BYD in 2020, the year that changed everything. The world enters a crisis, January 2020. At the beginning of 2020, nobody knew how dramatically the year was about to change. The COVID-19 outbreak was spreading. Businesses were facing uncertainty. Factories were shutting down. And the automobile industry was preparing for a major disruption. For BYD, this was a serious challenge. The company had spent years building its automobile business. Its electric vehicles were becoming increasingly important. Its battery technology was improving. Its international operations were expanding. But suddenly, the entire world had entered a crisis, and BYD had a decision to make. Would it focus only on protecting its own business? Or could it use its manufacturing capabilities to help fight the crisis? The answer would surprise the world. BYD enters the medical supply business, February 2020. BYD Chairman Wang Chuanfu created a special task force to help produce masks and disinfectant. More than 3,000 engineers and employees from different parts of the company became involved in the project, and on February 8, BYD began producing these critical supplies. Think about what that meant. A company known primarily for batteries and automobiles was now designing production lines for medical supplies. The company had to move incredibly quickly. Engineers worked on production line design. Workers operated day and night. Machines ran around the clock. And BYD used its existing manufacturing expertise to solve a completely different problem. Within weeks, the scale became enormous. By March, BYD said its mask manufacturing operation had reached a capacity of around 5 million masks per day, along with hundreds of thousands of bottles of disinfectant. At that point, BYD described the facility as the world's largest mass-produced face mask manufacturing plant. The company had transformed part of its industrial capacity in the middle of a global emergency. But while BYD was helping fight the pandemic, another revolution was happening inside its laboratories. The battery that had been years in the making. March 2020. For years, BYD had been working on battery technology. The company knew that one of the biggest obstacles facing electric vehicles wasn't simply range, it was trust. Consumers needed to believe that an electric vehicle battery could be safe. Because lithium-ion batteries contain enormous amounts of stored energy. If something goes seriously wrong, thermal runaway can occur. And thermal runaway can lead to fire. So BYD engineers focused on a fundamental question. Can an electric vehicle battery be made significantly safer? Their answer was a new battery architecture. A battery that would become famous as the Blade battery. The Blade battery is revealed. March 29, 2020, BYD officially announced the Blade battery. The name came from the shape of its individual cells. Instead of using relatively short, block-shaped cells, BYD designed long, thin cells. These cells could be arranged differently inside the battery pack. And that design allowed BYD to use the available space more efficiently. BYD said the new architecture increased battery pack space utilization by more than 50% compared with conventional lithium iron phosphate block batteries. But the most important part wasn't the shape. It was the chemistry. The Blade battery uses lithium iron phosphate, commonly known as LFP. LFP chemistry has important characteristics. It is known for strong thermal stability, good cycle life, and avoiding nickel and cobalt. But there was a trade-off. Traditional LFP batteries generally had lower energy density than some nickel-rich lithium-ion chemistries. So BYD had to solve another problem. How do you improve the usable energy of an LFP battery without sacrificing its safety advantages? The answer was not simply a new chemical formula. It was engineering. BYD redesigned the physical structure of the battery pack. The Blade battery uses lithium iron phosphate, commonly known as LFP. LFP chemistry has important characteristics. It is known for strong thermal stability, good cycle life, and avoiding nickel and cobalt. But there was a trade-off. Traditional LFP batteries generally had lower energy density than some nickel-rich lithium-ion chemistries. So BYD had to solve another problem. How do you improve the usable energy of an LFP battery without sacrificing its safety advantages? The answer was not simply a new chemical formula. It was engineering. BYD redesigned the physical structure of the battery pack. BYD showed footage of the Blade battery undergoing this test. According to BYD's published results, the Blade battery produced no smoke or fire in the demonstrated test, while its surface temperature reached approximately 30 to 60 degrees Celsius. BYD also compared this with other battery types in its demonstration. A ternary lithium battery exceeded 500 degrees Celsius and burned violently. A conventional LFP block battery did not show open flames in the demonstration, but reached much higher surface temperatures. BYD's message was clear. Battery safety had to be treated as seriously as range, and that was an important argument. Because during the early EV revolution, manufacturers often competed aggressively over driving range. More range meant bigger batteries. Bigger batteries meant more energy. But BYD was saying, what good is a long-range battery if consumers don't trust its safety? The Blade battery was BYD's answer. But the Blade battery wasn't just about safety. The Blade battery had another advantage. Its long, thin cells could act as structural elements within the battery pack. This allowed BYD to use space more efficiently. More efficient packaging meant more room for battery material, potentially better range, and potentially better use of space inside the vehicle. This was a crucial engineering achievement. BYD wasn't simply changing the chemistry. It was changing the way the battery was packaged. And that distinction would become extremely important in the years ahead. The Han, BYD's flagship. While BYD was preparing its battery technology, another project was approaching the market. A car designed to prove that BYD could compete in the premium segment. Its name was BYD Han. The Han had been years in development. It wasn't supposed to be an ordinary electric sedan. It was designed as a flagship. A statement. BYD wanted to show the world that a Chinese electric vehicle could compete in performance, technology, safety, and luxury. The Han arrives. The BYD Han was officially launched in China in July 2020. And it became the first mass-produced vehicle to use BYD's Blade battery. That made the Han extremely important in BYD's history. It wasn't simply another new model. It was the first major demonstration of BYD's new battery technology in a production vehicle. And the specifications were impressive. The long-range pure electric version was advertised with up to 605 kilometers of NEDC range. The high-performance all-wheel drive version could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in approximately 3.9 seconds. These numbers were important for another reason. BYD was trying to destroy an old perception. The perception that Chinese electric vehicles were cheap, slow, and technologically behind Western brands. The Han was designed to challenge that idea. Performance meets luxury. The Han combined electric performance with a premium interior. BYD introduced its dragon face design language. Inside, the company used higher-end materials and technology. The car included advanced driver assistance features, large displays, smart connectivity, advanced safety systems, and a powerful electric drivetrain. But the biggest technological story remained underneath the vehicle: the blade battery. This was the technology BYD wanted the world to remember. The Han starts making noise. The Han launched during one of the most difficult years in modern automotive history, yet demand began building. BYD later reported that the Han sold more than 10,000 units per month for consecutive months after its launch. By the end of 2020, the model had become one of BYD's most important products. According to BYD's own reporting, the Han sold 40,556 units during the second half of 2020. That was remarkable. A new Chinese electric sedan, using a new battery technology, was beginning to establish itself in a competitive segment. BYD was no longer competing only on price. It was competing on technology. BYD and Toyota. But 2020 brought another important development, one that revealed how seriously BYD's technology was being taken. Toyota. Toyota was one of the world's most experienced automobile manufacturers. For decades, Toyota had been one of the leaders in hybrid technology. Now, Toyota wanted to accelerate its battery electric vehicle development in China. In 2019, Toyota and BYD had agreed to establish a joint venture for battery electric vehicle research and development. In April 2020, the companies announced that the new joint venture had been registered. It would operate as BYD Toyota EV Technology. BYD and Toyota each held 50%. The mission was to develop battery electric vehicles and related technologies for the Chinese market. Think about what this meant. A company that had started in 1995 making rechargeable batteries was now working with Toyota, one of the world's most established automobile manufacturers, to develop electric vehicles. That was a major sign of how far BYD had traveled. The D1, a different kind of electric car. But BYD wasn't only thinking about private car owners. It was also thinking about transportation as a service. In November 2020, BYD and Chinese ride-hailing company Didi introduced the D1. It was designed specifically for ride-hailing. This was different from a normal passenger car. The vehicle was designed around the needs of drivers and passengers using ride-hailing services. Features included a sliding rear door, more passenger space, and systems designed around ride-hailing operations. Why was this important? Because BYD was thinking beyond. How do we sell more cars? It was thinking, how will people use transportation in the future? Private cars, taxis, ride-hailing, public buses, commercial vehicles. BYD wanted to participate in all of them. The numbers tell another story. Now, There is something important we need to understand. 2020 was not an easy year for BYD. The company was dealing with the pandemic. Its new energy vehicle sales were actually lower than the previous year. According to BYD's December 2020 sales announcement, the company sold approximately 189,689 new energy vehicles during 2020. That included 130,970 battery electric vehicles and 48,084 plug-in hybrid vehicles, along with new energy commercial vehicles. Total vehicle sales across its categories reached approximately 426,972 units. So, on the surface, 2020 was not simply a story of explosive sales growth. It was a year of transformation. And then something unexpected happened. Despite the difficult automotive market, BYD's financial performance improved. The company's 2020 revenue reached approximately 156.6 billion yuan. That was about 22.6% higher than 2019. And net profit attributable to shareholders reached approximately 4.23 billion yuan. That was more than double the previous year's figure. How? Part of the answer was that BYD was no longer dependent on just one business. It had several major areas: automotives, battery technology, electronics manufacturing, components, photovoltaic and energy-related businesses. This diversification gave BYD resilience. And this was one of the company's most important characteristics. BYD wasn't simply an automaker. It was an industrial technology group, the mask factory and the car factory. There was something almost symbolic about BYD in 2020. Inside one part of its industrial network, workers were producing electric vehicles. In another, workers were producing batteries. And somewhere else, machines were producing millions of masks. The same company that had spent decades learning how to manufacture batteries and electronics was now using those capabilities to respond to a global emergency. This demonstrated one of BYD's greatest strengths: manufacturing flexibility. The ability to redesign production, move engineers, create new equipment, and scale a new product extremely quickly. That capability would become increasingly important as BYD expanded. The bigger picture. Let's stop for a moment. Because 2020 wasn't just about a battery. It wasn't just about a car. It wasn't just about masks. Something much bigger had happened. BYD had demonstrated that it could combine battery technology, automotive manufacturing, electronics, software and control systems, energy technology, mass production, and, increasingly, global partnerships. This combination was becoming BYD's greatest competitive advantage. The old BYD was disappearing. Remember the BYD we saw in Episode 1? A small battery company founded in Shenzhen in 1995, with only a few dozen employees. That company had spent years learning how to make batteries cheaper and more efficiently. Then it entered automobiles, then hybrids, then electric cars, then buses, then energy systems. And now, in 2020, it had created a battery that attracted global attention: a flagship electric sedan, a partnership with Toyota, a purpose-built ride-hailing EV, and a huge medical manufacturing operation during a pandemic. BYD had become something very different. The real turning point. But perhaps the most important part of 2020 wasn't what BYD sold. It was what BYD had learned. It had learned that batteries were not just a component. They were the foundation of the electric vehicle. It had learned that controlling technology could be more powerful than simply assembling products. And it had learned that its manufacturing capabilities could be used far beyond automotives. BYD had spent 25 years preparing for the electric future, and in 2020, that future finally began to arrive. The battle ahead. But BYD wasn't alone. Tesla was growing rapidly. Volkswagen was preparing a massive electric vehicle strategy. Chinese EV startups such as NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto were gaining attention. Traditional manufacturers were finally taking electric vehicles seriously. The competition was about to become brutal, and BYD knew it. The company needed more than one successful battery. It needed an entire new generation of vehicles. It needed better software, better platforms, better designs, lower costs, faster charging, more efficient manufacturing, and a global strategy. The next chapter would be even bigger.